Anna never imagined her life would change like this. At 28, she thought she had a solid marriage, or at least something close to it. She had met Lucas in college, and together, they had built a simple but meaningful life. A small apartment, weekend getaways, and shared dreams of a promising future. But what was supposed to be a balanced partnership always had a third presence: Sandra, Lucas's mother. A widow, possessive, and seemingly willing to do anything to keep her son under her control, she had never hidden her disdain for Anna. At first, Anna thought she could handle it. But little by little, Sandra's influence began to eat away at what Anna once believed was an unshakable love. In the early years, Anna tried to ignore Sandra's remarks, subtle jabs about her looks, comments suggesting Lucas deserved someone better, constant critiques of how she cooked or kept the house. But what once seemed like harmless passive aggression turned into something much more insidious. The bond between Lucas and his mother was disturbingly intense. Sandra was always there, interfering in their decisions, and when she didn't get her way, she played the role of the suffering mother, manipulating Lucas with guilt. At first, Anna thought it was just a matter of time before he set boundaries. But on that particular night, everything collapsed. She had planned a special dinner to share the news of her pregnancy, but Sandra arrived, unannounced as always. And what happened next made Anna realize that maybe she had already lost Lucas for good. Anna had spent the whole day making everything perfect. She wanted this moment to be special, just the two of them, celebrating the new life growing inside her. She had set the table with their best plates, lit a candle, and even made Lucas's favorite dish. She had rehearsed the words in her head a dozen times, picturing his reaction, the joy in his eyes when he heard the news. But all of that was ruined the second Sandra walked in. No knock, no warning. Just her usual entitled presence, acting as if she belonged there more than Anna did. Sandra sat at the table without hesitation, as if she were the hostess. Lucas, instead of saying anything, simply poured her a glass of wine, as if this was completely normal. Anna felt the air grow heavy. She swallowed her frustration, determined not to let Sandra's intrusion ruin everything. But then it happened. In the middle of dinner, Sandra leaned in and whispered something in Lucas's ear. Whatever she said, it changed him instantly. His entire body stiffened, his grip on his fork tightening. And then, with eyes full of something Anna had never seen before, accusation, maybe even disgust, he turned to her and asked, "Is it true?" Anna froze. Her mind raced to catch up. True? What was he talking about? She searched his face for a clue, but all she saw was anger, cold, sharp, and entirely misplaced. What? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas didn't answer. Instead, before she could react, his hand struck her face. The pain came first, a burning sting spreading across her cheek, then the shock. Her plate slipped from her hands, crashing onto the floor, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the silent room. Time seemed to slow as she touched her face, her skin pulsing where his fingers had landed. She wanted to believe this wasn't real, that this was some kind of horrible mistake. But then she saw Sandra's face. Calm. Unmoved. Watching as if this was exactly how things should be. And then, as if her body had given up trying to hold it in, the nausea overwhelmed her. She barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. The stress, the emotions, the pregnancy, it all hit at once. When she finally steadied herself, breathing heavily, she heard a rustling behind her. Something had fallen from her bag. The test. The pregnancy test lay exposed on the bathroom floor, the bright positive sign unmistakable. Lucas saw it. And he froze. The anger in his eyes flickered, confusion, regret, something unreadable flashing across his face. His gaze darted from the test to Anna, his breath uneven. Sandra saw it too, but unlike her son, her face remained unchanged. Cold. Calculating. You, Lucas's voice came out unsteady, almost a whisper. You're pregnant? Anna stood there, one hand gripping the edge of the sink, the other still pressed to her burning cheek. Her eyes were glossy, but her voice was firm when she answered. Yes. I am. Silence swallowed the room whole. Lucas looked at his own hand as if he had just realized what he had done. But it was too late. A wave of certainty crashed over Anna. Nothing would ever be the same again. Anna didn't wait for Lucas to say anything else. She turned, walked out of the bathroom, and grabbed her bag from the floor. Her hands trembled as she stuffed the scattered items back inside, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. She had to get out. Now. Lucas took a step toward her, but she recoiled before he could touch her. His face twisted with guilt, but she didn't care. Whatever regret he felt now wasn't enough to erase what he had done. Not tonight. Not ever. Without another word, she headed for the door. She didn't look back. The cold night air hit her skin like a slap, but she barely felt it. Her body was moving on instinct, her legs carrying her forward without any real direction. It wasn't until she reached the end of the street that she pulled out her phone. Her fingers hesitated for only a second before dialing the one number she knew she could trust. Marina. Marina picked up on the second ring. Anna? Her voice was laced with concern, even before Anna could say a word. Anna opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. The lump in her throat was too thick, her emotions too raw. She pressed a hand against her cheek, feeling the swelling, and forced herself to speak. "I need to stay with you tonight," she managed. That was all Marina needed to hear. "Where are you?" Anna gave her the location, and Marina didn't hesitate. "Stay there. I'm coming." 15 minutes later, Marina's car pulled up beside the curb. The moment Anna got in, Marina's expression darkened. Her best friend didn't ask what happened, she didn't need to. The forming bruise on Anna's face said everything. "Did he do this?" Marina's voice was quiet, but her grip on the steering wheel tightened. Anna nodded. Marina inhaled sharply but didn't press further. Instead, she put the car in drive and said the only thing Anna needed to hear. "You're safe now." Anna barely spoke during the drive. She stared out the window, watching the city lights blur together, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what she felt: anger, grief, fear? Maybe all of it at once. Her cheek throbbed, but the pain wasn't just physical. It was the weight of everything crashing down at once. When they arrived at Marina's apartment, Anna finally exhaled. The moment she stepped inside, her body felt heavy, as if the last bit of strength she had been holding on to finally gave out. Marina locked the door behind them and turned to face her, eyes scanning her carefully. "You don't have to tell me everything now," she said gently. "But I need to know one thing." Anna looked up. "You're not going back to him, right?" Anna felt the question sink deep into her chest. She had been running on pure instinct since leaving the apartment, barely allowing herself to process what had happened. But now, standing in Marina's dimly lit living room, the weight of everything settled onto her shoulders. She was pregnant. Her husband had hit her. His mother had watched, indifferent. And now Marina was asking the one thing she hadn't allowed herself to consider yet. Was she going back? The logical answer was obvious: of course not. But logic didn't erase 4 years of shared history, the home they built, the man she had loved for so long. Logic didn't erase the moments when Lucas was good, when he was the person she had believed he would always be. But then she touched her cheek again, feeling the swelling beneath her fingertips, and the answer became clear. "No," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'm not." Marina exhaled, shoulders dropping slightly. "Good." She walked toward the kitchen, opening a cabinet and pulling out a first aid kit. "Come here. Let me see your face." Anna hesitated but eventually sat down at the small dining table. The silence between them was thick but comforting. Marina didn't push, didn't demand details, she simply dabbed a cool cloth against Anna's cheek, her movements careful, deliberate. Anna winced, but she didn't complain. The cold was a relief compared to the burning heat left by Lucas's hand. "I always had a bad feeling about him," Marina murmured, not looking up. "Not at first. But when he started changing," she trailed off, shaking her head. "I just never thought he'd actually," her voice faltered, and Anna saw the anger flicker behind her friend's eyes. It wasn't just anger at Lucas. It was anger at the situation, at the fact that this had happened at all. "What are you going to do now?" Marina finally asked. Anna stared at the table, her fingers tracing the wood grain absent-mindedly. "What am I going to do?" The question felt too big, too heavy to answer. A week ago, she had been planning a surprise dinner to celebrate her pregnancy. Now, she was sitting in her best friend's apartment, nursing a bruise given to her by the man who was supposed to love her. The thought made her stomach churn. She had nowhere to go. Her parents lived in another state, and she couldn't just show up at their doorstep pregnant and heartbroken. She didn't want them to see her like this. But she also knew one thing for certain: she wasn't stepping foot in that apartment again. Not with Lucas. Not with Sandra lurking in the shadows, whispering poison into his ear. "I need to figure things out," Anna finally said, her voice quieter now. "I need time." Marina nodded, understanding. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said, her tone firm, leaving no room for argument. Anna looked up at her, the weight of her exhaustion pressing down harder. She wasn't used to this, to being the one who needed saving. She had always been the one to fix things, to hold everything together. But now? Now she felt like a glass figurine that had been dropped, shattered into too many pieces to count. "I don't even know where to start," Anna admitted, voice breaking just a little. Marina reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "One step at a time," she said softly. "You don't have to figure out everything tonight. Just breathe." The kindness in her voice nearly undid Anna. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and for the first time since the night began, she allowed herself to believe, maybe, just maybe, she would be okay. The next few days felt like a blur. Anna barely touched her phone, ignoring the endless calls and messages from Lucas. At first, they were apologies, pleas for forgiveness, promises that it would never happen again. Then, when she didn't respond, the messages shifted. Accusations, desperation, and mixed between them, the ones that chilled her to the bone, the messages from Sandra. "You ruined my son's life. If you were a real wife, none of this would have happened. Do you really think you can take my grandchild away from his father?" Anna stared at the words on the screen, her stomach twisting. Sandra's words shouldn't have surprised her. This was who she had always been. But it was the sheer certainty in her tone that unsettled Anna. As if she truly believed she had the right to control everything. As if she thought Anna was still the same woman who had once tiptoed around her, trying to earn her approval. She wasn't. Not anymore. Marina was watching her from across the room, reading her expression without needing to ask. "He's not stopping, is he?" Anna shook her head. "And neither is she." Marina exhaled sharply, getting up and pacing the small living room. "You need to block them both." "I know," Anna said. But she hesitated. Part of her wanted to believe that Lucas meant his apologies, that there was still some part of the man she had fallen in love with inside him. But then she remembered the look in his eyes that night. The way his hand had moved before his mind had even caught up. She didn't owe him her patience. Or her forgiveness. Without another second of hesitation, she deleted the messages and blocked both their numbers. Marina watched as Anna placed the phone face down on the table and let out a slow breath, as if she had been holding it in for too long. "Good," Marina said. "Now let's talk about what comes next." "What comes next?" Anna repeated the words, as if saying them aloud would somehow make the answer clearer. But the truth was, she had no idea. She had left. She had cut contact. But now what? She was pregnant, homeless, and completely unprepared for what came after. She had spent so much time surviving that she hadn't even thought about what rebuilding her life would look like. Marina sat across from her, waiting patiently, but Anna could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't going to let her sink. "I need to find a place to stay," Anna finally admitted. "I can't live here forever." "You can for as long as you need," Marina corrected, folding her arms. "But I get it. You want your own space." Anna nodded. "I also need to find a lawyer." The thought sent a wave of nausea through her. The idea of going to court, of having to fight for custody of a baby that wasn't even born yet, made her chest tighten. But she knew Sandra wasn't bluffing. That woman would do everything in her power to keep Anna under control, even if it meant using the baby as a weapon. "I need to make sure Lucas can't just take my child from me." Marina's expression hardened. "I know someone," she said. "A friend of my brother's. He specializes in cases like this. I'll call him first thing tomorrow." Anna swallowed hard, nodding. "Okay." It felt strange, like the first real step towards something concrete. For the first time in days, she wasn't just reacting, she was planning. And it made all the difference. That night, Anna barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, memories of Lucas's anger, Sandra's manipulations, and the sharp sting of betrayal replayed in her mind like a broken film reel. But underneath it all, there was something else, fear. Not just for herself, but for the child growing inside her. She had always imagined raising her baby in a home filled with love, not in the shadow of a man who had proven he could hurt her. Not under the influence of a woman who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle. She turned onto her side, staring at the faint glow of her phone on the nightstand. The weight of everything pressed down on her chest, but there was also something else. A quiet, stubborn resolve. By morning, that resolve had solidified. She wasn't just leaving Lucas. She was making sure he never had the power to hurt her, or their child, again. As soon as the sun rose, Marina was already on the phone with the lawyer, explaining the situation in hushed, urgent tones. When she hung up, she turned to Anna with a nod. "He can see you this afternoon." Anna felt her stomach tighten, but she nodded. This was happening. No more second-guessing. No more wondering if Lucas would change. No more hoping Sandra would stay out of their lives. As she got dressed, she caught her reflection in the mirror, the faint bruise on her cheek, the exhaustion in her eyes. But for the first time in days, she saw something else, too. Strength. The lawyer's office was small but professional, with shelves lined with thick legal books and neatly stacked case files. Anna sat across from a man in his 40s, sharp-eyed and serious, his hands clasped together as he listened to her story. She hated having to say it out loud, to admit what had happened, to relive the moment when everything shattered. But she forced herself to. Every word she spoke felt like a step forward, a piece of control she was reclaiming. When she finished, the lawyer leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "We need to move quickly. If he realizes you're planning legal action, he might try to get ahead of it." The thought sent a shiver down Anna's spine, but she nodded. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "We'll file a restraining order first," he said, already jotting down notes. "And we need to establish a legal record of his violence. That means a police report, medical records, anything that proves what he did." Anna felt her stomach tighten. She hadn't gone to the police. She hadn't even considered it in the chaos of leaving. But the lawyer's expression was firm. "I know it's overwhelming, but it's necessary. If this goes to court, we need evidence to keep him and his mother from trying to manipulate the system." Anna inhaled sharply, pressing her fingers together. She had spent so long protecting Lucas, excusing his behavior, believing things would get better. But now she was protecting herself and her child. The police station smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, the fluorescent lights making everything look colder than it already felt. Anna sat stiffly on the hard plastic chair, her hands gripping each other in her lap. She hadn't wanted to come. Even as the lawyer insisted it was necessary, even as Marina reassured her she was doing the right thing, there had been a small, irrational part of her that wanted to turn around and pretend none of this was happening. But she didn't. She couldn't. When the officer sat across from her and asked, "What brings you here today?" she swallowed the lump in her throat and told the truth. She spoke about the months of manipulation, the way Sandra had slowly tightened her grip on Lucas, how her husband had become more distant, more irritable. Then she described that night. The dinner, the whisper in Lucas's ear, the way his hand had struck her before she even understood what was happening. She told them about the messages, the threats, the fear she felt knowing Sandra wouldn't stop until she had full control again. When she finished, the officer nodded and typed something into the computer. "We'll need photos of the injury," he said. Anna hesitated, but Marina was already pulling out her phone. "I have some from the night it happened," she said, her voice unwavering. Anna turned to her, surprised. "I knew you'd need them," Marina said simply, handing the phone over. Anna exhaled, a mix of gratitude and exhaustion washing over her. She wasn't alone in this. The officer studied the photos, his expression unreadable as he scrolled through them. Anna looked away, unable to stomach seeing herself like that, eyes swollen from crying, a faint bruise darkening along her cheekbone. It didn't even feel like her. It felt like looking at a stranger, someone who had been broken down into something unrecognizable. But as much as it hurt, this was necessary. Proof. Evidence. Protection. "We'll file the report today," the officer said, his tone professional but not unkind. "With this documentation and your lawyer's request for a restraining order, Lucas will be legally prohibited from contacting you. He paused, then added, that includes his mother, if we can prove she's also a threat. Anna felt a wave of relief at those words. The thought of Sandra lurking, plotting, whispering venom into Lucas's ear from the sidelines, it terrified her just as much as Lucas himself. What happens if he tries to reach me anyway? She asked, voice steady but quiet. The officer's gaze hardened. Then we escalate it. If he violates the order, he can be arrested. Anna nodded, absorbing the weight of it all. It wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time since that night, she felt something shift inside her, a sense of control slowly returning. Back at Marina's apartment, Anna felt the exhaustion settle deep in her bones. Every step she had taken that day, talking to the lawyer, filing the police report, had been necessary, but it had drained her completely. She collapsed onto the couch, closing her eyes for just a second, trying to quiet the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. But then her phone buzzed. Instinctively, her stomach clenched. She had blocked Lucas and Sandra, but anxiety still spiked every time she heard that sound. Marina, sitting across the room, noticed her reaction. It's not them, she reassured her, glancing at Anna's phone. It's your lawyer. Anna hesitated before picking it up. The message was short, straight to the point, restraining order approved. Effective immediately. Lucas has been served. She exhaled, gripping the phone a little tighter. It was real now. Legally, he couldn't come near her. He couldn't call, couldn't text. And if he did, there would be consequences. She expected to feel relieved, and in some ways, she did. But beneath that relief, there was something else, grief. Not for him, but for the life she had once believed in. The future she had pictured. It was gone now, and there was no going back. Marina watched her carefully. How do you feel? Anna swallowed hard before answering. Like I can finally breathe. Days passed, and for the first time in a long time, Anna felt a semblance of peace. She wasn't constantly checking over her shoulder. She wasn't waking up to dozens of missed calls or messages dripping with manipulation. She could go to bed without feeling like a prisoner in her own life. But even as things seemed to settle, a part of her remained on edge, like a wound that hadn't fully healed. She knew Lucas. She knew Sandra. They wouldn't let go so easily. And she was right. One afternoon, as she was leaving a doctor's appointment, her phone rang. An unknown number. At first, she almost ignored it, but something in her gut told her to pick up. The moment she heard the voice on the other end, her body went rigid. Anna. Lucas. She didn't speak, gripping the phone so tightly her fingers ached. He wasn't supposed to be calling. The restraining order made that clear. But here he was, acting like the rules didn't apply to him. I know I'm not supposed to call, he continued, his voice lower now. But I needed to hear your voice. Please. Just talk to me. Anna's heart pounded, anger and fear colliding inside her. He needed to hear her voice? After everything? After the bruises, the betrayal, the threats? Her grip on the phone tightened. You're not supposed to contact me, she said, forcing her voice to stay even. You're breaking the law. There was silence on the other end. Then, a sigh. Anna, she hung up. Her hands were shaking as she pulled up Marina's number, dialing without hesitation. When her best friend answered, Anna didn't waste time. He called me. Marina didn't hesitate. We're calling your lawyer. Now. Anna nodded, still gripping her phone as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. She had expected Lucas to push boundaries, but not this soon. Not so directly. She could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the way he was probably convincing himself that one call didn't really count as breaking the restraining order. That his intentions somehow excused his actions. But she knew better. She knew that if she let this slide, if she gave him even an inch, he would take a mile. Marina was already dialing the lawyer, her voice clipped and serious as she explained what had happened. Anna paced the room, every muscle in her body coiled with tension. The baby inside her gave a small kick, and she placed a hand on her stomach, a sharp reminder of what was really at stake here. This wasn't just about her anymore. She had to protect her child. When Marina hung up, she turned to Anna. He's filing a violation report now. If Lucas tries anything again, they can arrest him. Anna exhaled, relief and anxiety mixing into something heavy. She wanted to believe this would be enough, that Lucas would finally understand that she wasn't his to control anymore. But deep down, she wasn't sure. He had already crossed the line once. And people like him didn't stop until they were forced to. The following days were tense. Anna tried to focus on herself, on the baby, on rebuilding the life that had been torn apart. But no matter how much she tried to push it aside, the fear lingered like a shadow. She knew Lucas. She knew the way his mind worked. He wasn't the kind of man to simply accept defeat. And Sandra? She was worse. The silence from both of them felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Then, the storm came. Anna and Marina had just returned from the grocery store when they spotted it, a black car parked across the street, its engine idling. Anna felt her stomach drop the second she recognized the shape of the man in the driver's seat. Lucas. He wasn't at her door. He wasn't calling or texting. But he was watching. Marina saw him at the same time Anna did. That son of a, she dropped the grocery bags on the floor and reached for her phone. "We're calling the police." Anna's breath came in shallow bursts, her pulse hammering in her ears. He can't do this. He can't be here. But he was. He was sitting there like he had every right to, like the restraining order meant nothing. Their eyes met through the windshield, and for the briefest moment, she saw something in his expression that terrified her more than anything else. He wasn't angry. He wasn't desperate. He was calm. Like a man who had already decided exactly what he was going to do next. Marina didn't wait. She was already on the phone with the police, her voice sharp and urgent as she explained the situation. "Yes, we have a restraining order. Yes, he's outside right now. No, he's not trying to enter, but he's watching her." Anna barely registered the words, her body frozen in place as she stared at Lucas through the car's windshield. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, eyes locked onto hers. Minutes passed like hours. Then, as if deciding he had seen enough, Lucas put the car in gear. But instead of speeding off, he gave her one last look, a slow, deliberate glance that sent ice through her veins. Then, he drove away. The silence he left behind was deafening. Anna's hands shook as she turned to Marina. "He's not done." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Marina's jaw tightened. "No. But neither are we." She turned back to the phone. "How long until an officer gets here?" Anna exhaled shakily. This wasn't over. Not yet. But she wasn't running anymore. She was going to end this, for good. Anna barely slept that night. Every sound outside made her heart race, every shadow under the door made her pulse spike. She knew Lucas wasn't gone. He had backed off for now, but he was waiting for the right moment, the right excuse to try again. She wasn't going to give him one. At dawn, she sat at the kitchen table with Marina, both of them drinking coffee in silence. The air felt heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Marina broke it. "You know this won't stop until you make sure he has no way to reach you," she said, her voice careful but firm. "You need to disappear from his world, Anna." Anna knew she was right. The restraining order helped, but it wasn't enough. Lucas had always been good at bending rules, finding loopholes, twisting situations to make himself the victim. And Sandra? She would never stop pushing him, whispering in his ear, feeding his obsession. If Anna wanted to be truly free, she had to do something drastic. She had to erase herself from his life. By midday, Anna had made her decision. She wasn't just going to block Lucas, she was going to cut every possible tie that connected them. It started with the obvious, changing her phone number. Marina sat beside her as she spoke with the service provider, her heart pounding with every step. Once the call ended, she took a deep breath. One less way for him to reach her. But it wasn't enough. Next came social media. She deleted every account, wiped away years of photos, comments, and memories. Lucas would search for her, she knew that. He would try to find traces of her online, any clue about where she was, what she was doing. But she wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Each click, each confirmation of delete account, felt like cutting away a chain she hadn't realized was weighing her down. Then came the hardest part, her bank accounts, her mailing address, her job. She had already spoken to her lawyer about legal protections, but now it was about practical safety. With Marina's help, she set up a new P.O. box, rerouted her bills, and even started looking into changing her workplace. She didn't want Lucas to have any way of tracking her. By the time she was done, she felt raw, like she had torn apart an old version of herself and was standing in the wreckage. But she also felt something else. Lighter. A week passed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Anna started to feel something close to normal. She wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder. She wasn't waking up to the weight of fear pressing on her chest. She was healing. Slowly, but surely. Then, out of nowhere, the lawyer called. "There's been an update," he said, his voice measured. "Lucas was arrested last night." Anna's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "He violated the restraining order again," the lawyer explained. "Apparently, he showed up at your old apartment, tried to get inside. The new tenants called the police. When they ran his name, they saw the order against him. He's being held for questioning." Anna sat down, gripping the edge of the table. Lucas had actually been caught. For so long, she had feared he would get away with it, that the law wouldn't be enough. But this was real. "Will he stay in jail?" she asked, barely able to believe she was saying those words. "That depends," the lawyer admitted. "But this puts him in a very difficult position. If he violates the order again, the consequences will be worse." Anna closed her eyes, exhaling. For the first time, Lucas was facing something he couldn't manipulate his way out of. And for the first time, Anna felt like she had truly won. That night, Anna sat on Marina's balcony, staring out at the city lights. The weight that had been crushing her for weeks, months, felt lighter now. Lucas was no longer a looming shadow over her life. He was facing real consequences. And Sandra? She had been quiet ever since the arrest, as if, for the first time, she had nothing left to say. Maybe she finally understood that Anna wasn't weak. That she wasn't someone they could control anymore. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the gentle movement of the baby inside her. "We're safe now," she thought. For the first time, she allowed herself to picture a future without fear. A home filled with warmth, where her child would never have to live under the weight of someone else's anger. She didn't know exactly what came next, there was still so much to figure out. But she did know one thing. She was free. And she would never let anyone take that from her again.